What's up everybody, welcome back to Speedy's Garage. Last week we were working on pinning the crank of our Hellcat Challenger Go Man Go here. This week we're going to finish it up and we're going to pick up right where we left off, but be sure to go back and check out last week if you haven't already caught up. Okay, next we're going to get the pinning jig set up on the crank. It uses the bolt that was included, which is a 24 millimeter. So I'm going to use a 1/2 inch drive, 24 millimeter. I'm going to use a little 1-inch extension to make it easier to reach, and to get the bolt started I've used a 3/8 to 1/2 inch adapter on my cordless ratchet. And then I'm going to put a little bit of torque on this bolt. The instructions that came with the kit didn't say anything about that, but what you don't want to do is start your drilling process and this move for some reason. So I'm going to use my torque wrench. You don't want to get it too tight either, so I'm going to put about 35 foot-pounds on it and call it good. And then we'll get to drilling. And I've gone ahead and set up the drill. You have to tape off the included bit that came with the kit. And there's very specific measurement they want to use, and it's 1 5/8 inches. So you probably can't see that, but I measured it 3 times to make sure it was right. And then I also made sure to double check it with the actual jig installed against the pin, so that I knew without a doubt it was perfect. Ready to go. I'm going to put just a little bit of WD-40 in that hole to kind of lubricate the bit and keep it cool. You don't want it to get hot because it'll get dull. Hopefully it's a good bit. Time to perform surgery. Okay, we're all set up. We had to put a little block of wood in here to push the radiator forward just a bit. Make sure you're wearing safety glasses. Now we're just going to start drilling. Started drilling and something unexpected happened that kind of gave me an oh crap moment. We actually broke the tip off the drill bit. So I was a little worried, so I pulled the jig back off to take a look to see if it had even made a hole yet, because it happened very quickly. I just noticed the drill bit wasn't moving anymore, and when I pulled the jig off, it had barely even scratched the crank pulley. So I don't know if I had a defective drill bit or maybe didn't get it in the jig straight. I don't know exactly what happened, but this is the drill bit that came with the ProCharger kit, the pinning kit that we got. So I just went to Home Depot and I said, what's the hardest drill bit you guys sell? And he said these Cobalt drill bits, they're made for hard steel. He says this is the hardest we have. And so I got 2 replacement drill bits. We're gonna try again. And I called our crew chief, Greg. He works with machines and master welder and stuff like that. And he said put some cutting oil on it. So we picked up some cutting oil. He said that should keep the drill bit cool and make it work a lot faster. So we're going to try again. Okay, we got it done as you saw. Hopefully that video turned out. Haven't looked at it yet, but this is how we made some room. We loosened the bolts that I talked about earlier, the 13 millimeter bolts on each side of the radiator support, and then I put a 2x6 between the radiator support and the K-member to kind of push the radiator back a bit. And that gave us good access to get in there and put the drill in and get it done. I highly recommend the tool oil that our crew chief Greg recommended. I picked this up at the hardware store. It seemed to make the cutting of the drill bit go much, much smoother. If I felt the drill bit slow down, I would just back it out, put 3 or 4 drops of this on it, and go at it again, and it went very quickly, actually. One last thing I did is I took the drill bit and I cut off 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch off the back end, not the tip, the back end that goes in the drill, and that allowed it to set into the drill a little bit farther and give me another 3/8, 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch of clearance to get up into the jig and get that hole drilled. So now we're just going to put a little green sleeve retainer from Permatex on the dowel pin and get that inserted. All right, this is going to be a little bit tricky because I've had to put a mirror. I've taped a mirror to the cardboard that's up against the radiator, and I'm going to have to do this on a mirror to try to see where to put the pin. So there you go, we got the crank pin inserted. We're gonna let that green Permatex, green Loctite, whatever you wanna call it, we're gonna let that set up before we put the crank bolt in, and that's next. Well, that was a little bit more work than I thought it was gonna be, and the nice thing about having this shop is when I've had enough for the day, and today I have, I can just shut the lights off and get back to it tomorrow. Alright, we're back. It's the next day, just had a good breakfast. Gotta get ready to put that crank bolt in. Okay, so tightening this bolt is gonna be a little bit interesting. Access is a challenge, as you've seen, and this particular bolt is a torque and then turn it so many degrees. So we've got to torque it to 148 foot-pounds, as I've mentioned, and then tighten it another 150 degrees. You saw that we borrowed a degree wheel from Keith. It fits over our 1/2-inch drive. We're going to set it up on 0. It's got 45 marks on one side and 30-degree marks on the other. I've gone ahead and marked where 150 is, and I'm going to get it set up on the car, and I'm going to 0 it out, and then tighten it till that pointer goes around to 150. Now, a lot can happen. The torque wrench could slip off the bolt. We could lose reference somehow, or this little thing gets stuck somehow and then the wheel turn. So as a backup, when I get the bolt torqued to 148 foot-pounds, I'm going to take a silver Sharpie and I'm going to mark the bolt at a certain spot so that I will always have a reference of where 148 foot-pounds is, and then I can figure out on the, I'm probably going to mark the washer as well as the crank pulley. I'll be able to figure out from there where 150 is. That way if I lose this, I've still got a reference mark, and I'm probably going to go ahead and do it with the degree wheel on there to start so that I've got something to start with. We'll see how it goes. I'm going to start by threading it in by hand. All right, I don't know if you can see that or not, but I made some marks just in case we lose track. I'm going to put the special tool in place now. All right, so we got a problem. The degree wheel will not fit. So we're going to use our index marks that we made on the bolt and the washer and the crank pulley. Okay, hopefully as you saw, I haven't looked at the video from under the engine bay yet, but this little degree wheel will not fit with the special service tool in place to hold the crank pulley still while we tighten it and have it locked in place with a breaker bar. So we're going to fall back to plan B. I did mark the bolt at 90 degrees, or horizontal, I'm sorry, be 0 degrees. I marked it again at 90. I marked it again at 135, and I've got a reference point of where I think 150 degrees is going to be. So it's the best I can do with what I've got. The fact that we've got the crank pulley pinned now makes that torque reading less important. You still want to get it, tight, but it's less important now because that pulley's not going to want to backspin. So you're taking all that pressure off of that crank bolt, but we're still going to get as close as we can. I'm going to eyeball it. It's going to be a little bit of a pain in the butt because I'm going to have to tighten it and kind of go, a little bit, and then take it off and look with a mirror and see where the marks are, and then tighten a little bit more. We're also going to set this big torque wrench up that we borrowed from Chad. We're going to set it back to 239 foot-pounds, which was the original torque spec. And so one of two things is going to happen. I'm going to hit 150 degrees, or it's going to click. So at that point, I'm going to call it good, and we're going to get putting the rest of the car back together. Whoa, it's tight. Whew. Well, we got it to 90 degrees. That's got to be it. Holy crap. I'm confident that's very, very close to 150 degrees. I mean, it might be 148, but it's super, super close. I think we're good. Whew, I'm a little red-faced after that. That's a tight bolt. I want to show you guys how I locked in the breaker bar and the special service tool. So I cushioned it against this bracket. I put the microfiber towel there so it wouldn't hurt anything. And that's how I did it by myself. If you have a partner come in, somebody'd have to hold that because the crank wants to spin like I mentioned previously. And if you can't get a hold of that special service tool, I was pretty lucky to get that, and it made things pretty easy actually, other than bench pressing that, still winded, that torque wrench. You can lock the transmission at the flywheel. Just take the inspection cover off and put a small piece of wood or something in there in the teeth of the flywheel, and it'll do the same thing. I'm gonna take a break. So I want to give you a closer look of my index marks that I made. You can see them in silver around the perimeter of the pulley and the washer, as well as the head of the bolt. And you'll see that's about as close to 150 degrees as we can get. And for those interested, the torque wrench never clicked. So I set it to 239 foot-pounds. I was curious if it would click before it got to the 150 degree mark on that bolt, and it never did. So they've made a pretty significant change in that bolt. I showed you it's fully threaded where this one was not. This one's got a section that isn't threaded, which is interesting, and it doesn't have the relief in the end of it that the new bolt has. It's also a different color. I don't know if that matters, but it could mean it's made of a different material, who knows? But that does mean that the new bolts, when they stretch like that, it's to keep constant tension on the pulley and the crank. So when that stretches out, it's trying to retract, or the metal wants to go back to its original shape, so it's always pulling those two pieces together. So we're good to go. I'm gonna regroup, clean up a little bit, start putting this thing back together. Okay, next we just muscle the fan back in from underneath, same way it came out. It's directional, so pay attention to how the tabs and everything go, but the flat side that has the little silver heatsink or whatever it is on the back of the fan motor faces the front of the car. Don't forget to take your cardboard out, which is protecting the radiator fins, and I recommend you not take this out until you get the fan back in place. Now we're just gonna bolt the fan up. Underneath, the fan just sits in a couple of rubber arms, or whatever you wanna call them, little rubber feet there. So make sure you've got them set on both sides. There's the other one, and then you can bolt it up. This is plastic, so don't over tighten it. Don't forget to tighten up your radiator brace. And if you disconnected the coolant line like I did, don't forget to connect it back up. And don't forget to put your hose clamp on it first. Okay, so I put just a little bit of coolant in the supercharger coolant reservoir and cycled it. Make sure it didn't have any leaks. Now I'm just gonna put the splash shields back on, and I always start with the push pins first because they'll kind of hold everything in place while you put the screws in. And don't over tighten the screws. Remember, you're basically putting these in plastic. Well, no more bolts in the tray. We must be done. So now we're going to go down off the ramps and top up the supercharger coolant. Cheers. Mrs. Speedy came out and said I had been spending enough time in the shop. I needed to get cleaned up and change clothes and take her to dinner, so that's what I did. So we're back in the shop now. We went for a test drive. We actually took Go to dinner, and I've got all the car put back together. Everything's good, except for one thing. I got a check engine light for low intercooler coolant. So I've been topping this up, and I thought I could just put the fluid back in it, go drive the car, and it would kind of cycle around and fill itself back up. There is a bleed screw on the very back. I'm going to show you that. You can see that it's got a little purple paint mark on it, but that's a little brass bleed screw for the supercharger coolant, just like the radiator has for the car. So I've been cracking that open and letting the air out. Now what I did, go for a drive, and then I loosen this. And if you do it when the car is hot, be careful. Nothing spectacular happened when I did mine, but I did put a towel over it just in case. And now I'm going to crack that bleed screw open. It's a little 7mm, and kind of bleed the air out. But I've done it a couple of times, and the car is still telling me the level is low. So it may just be one of those things that I'm going to have to drive it a few times to get that topped up. So that's pretty much what is involved in pinning the crank on a Hellcat. Now, I don't know why Dodge didn't see fit to key the crank from the factory. Project Sport Runner, the Toyota 4Runner, it's keyed, has a keyed crank from the factory, keyed to the pulley, crank pulley. It wasn't supercharged when I got it. I put the supercharger on it after. I didn't have to worry about any of this. The 2SS Camaro, also keyed from the factory, has a keyed crank. Again, I don't know why Dodge thought they would not key it and just use some crazy torque on a bolt and hope for the best. Not real fond of that. I do have the upgraded bolt now, so we accomplished two things. We got the upgraded bolt with the new torque spec installed, so we know we're gonna have a problem there, and we keyed the crank, so we're never gonna have an issue. One thing I will say, when this drill bit broke, and mine was the ProCharger kit, I got a little worried that this was gonna be a bigger job than I thought it was gonna be. So there's that ProCharger drill bit that came in the kit, and it snapped immediately. I mean, it didn't even make a scratch on the crank pulley. So I don't know if I just had a defective bit somehow. I asked Greg, our crew chief, and he said he works with this kind of stuff. He said he bets this was just defective somehow, or got damaged somehow in, you know, through its, you know, shipping around or whatever. It got bent or whatever. I went out and bought one of these Milwaukee cobalt bits. I've got a spare because I didn't need it. And all I did was chop off about 1/4 of an inch to make it a little bit shorter, to give me just that little bit more clearance. And it did it no problem. Put some of that cutting oil that Greg recommended on the bit, and it wasn't super easy, but it wasn't hard either. I just let the drill do the work, and it took just a minute or two, and we were finished. So I recommend, if you get a kit and it doesn't have a package where it tells you what kind of bit is actually in it. It was just loose in the package. I recommend you go buy one of these, because I know it works. We'd have been in big trouble if that had snapped off in the crank. That would have been a big job to get that out. So keep that in mind. I recommend you just go get another bit. I did use the special service tool that my buddy Keith loaned me. Made it quite easy, actually, to loosen and tighten the crank bolt. If you can't get a hold of one of these, just do it through the transmission. Take the inspection plate off, put a piece of wood in there, and do it that way. This came in handy though. The degree wheel, I mean, if you had the engine out of the car and on a stand, you could probably use something like that. Make sure, no matter what methodology you use, that you put those index marks on the bolt, the washer, and the crank pulley itself, so that if you lose where you are, you know where you are. You can look and say, okay, I knew I had a mark here, a silver Sharpie mark at 0, and now it's at about 60 degrees. You know you've got to go around here to 150. And so you'll kind of have an idea and a reference point of how far you've turned that bolt. What you don't want to do is lose track of where you're at. So I highly recommend you take a Sharpie and mark that bolt, the washer, as well as the pulley. That way you've got 3 marks that line up on each one of those. As far as difficulty, I don't want to say it was easy. It was quite a bit of work. I broke it up over 2 days, but again, I'm filming it. So anytime you try to document and film something and show somebody on camera how you do it, it doubles or triples the amount of time, because you're having to set the camera up, make sure you got the footage, you know, the shot the way you want it framed up and all of that. So that really adds a lot of time to a project. All in all, if you know what you're doing, I would say allocate about 4 hours to do this, if you do it the way I did, where I didn't take a whole bunch of the car apart. I've read of, you know, some people taking the whole front end of the car practically out, the radiator, the intercooler, all of that stuff, and I just didn't want to do that. I'm always less is more when it comes to taking something out of a car. And so all I had to do was loosen that one line underneath the bottom, the supercharger intercooler line, and then the fan dropped right out the bottom, and with the 90-degree little $30 Harbor Freight pneumatic drill, we got it done. Not easy, but not terribly hard either. Torquing the bolt, the 148 foot-pounds plus 150 degrees, I thought about that for like a day. I'm like, man, that's gonna be a lot of work, but that big torque wrench, the longer the torque wrench is, the more leverage obviously you can get on one end. It was a workout, but it wasn't terrible. So, I don't know. I would say on a scale of 1 to 10, if you know what you're doing, maybe a 6. If you're brand new to working on something, you probably wanna have somebody that's done it before come help you, and then it's probably gonna be an 8 or a 9. So just keep that in mind if you decide to do this job. Well, that's all I got for you today. Hopefully you found this video useful. We don't have to worry about Go Mango's crank anymore. If you like it, hit the thumbs up. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. Check us out on Instagram. It's at Speedys_garage, as well as our website, www.speedysgarage.net, and we'll see you out there.